This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Saturday. That means it's time for Nitsa Notes, my weekly vlog series about limited Magic. We're talking some more about Murders at Karlov Manor Limited. And today we're going to be taking a little bit of a deep dive on the data for the format. In particular, I'm going to talk about 10 cards that are better than you think they are. And I'm basing this on metrics from 17 Lands. If you want your data tracked by 17 Lands, you go to 17lands.com. And even if you don't want to track your data, you can look at the data that all of the tens of thousands of other players have. And we can use that data to talk about the limited format. Today, we're going to use that data to talk about 10 cards that are better than you think they are. And what I mean by that is these are cards that are being taken pretty late in drafts based on how high their win rate is. As usual, I have a baseline card that we can use, first of all, to introduce you to the data from 17 Lands if you're not familiar with it, and then also as sort of a point of comparison for us as we look at the 10 cards on this list. So our card that is our baseline card this time is Tunnel Tipster, a card that I think we can all agree is pretty good. It's a very nice common for green. You know, it's a 2-mana 1/1 that can tap for green, and then it has this upside where it just gains +1/+1 counters. Kind of feels like Werebear sometimes, which is a pretty nice comparison for Tunnel Tipster, because it ends up being like a 4/4 in the later stages of the game sometimes. It has a win rate of 56.2%, and that win rate is pretty good. It's not as high as it sounds, because 17 Lands players on average have a win rate of 55.5% for this format, and so that means this is, you know, above average, but it's not insane. It's kind of a C+ level card, probably. A card that is a great 2-drop that you want in your green decks, and it's taken right around a 5th pick. So let's start by looking at a couple of cards with the exact same win rate as Tunnel Tipster, but that are being taken significantly later. So let's start with the green card too, because I think that's an especially interesting point of comparison. So Vengeful Creeper, its average pick is 8.49, so on average it's taken as like an 8th or 9th pick, and it has a win rate of the same, 56.2%. Now, I do want to say that the data doesn't necessarily mean, hey, I should take Vengeful Creeper before Tunnel Tipster. In fact, I'd argue the data says you shouldn't. And the reason for that is that 2-drops are more important than your disguise creature / 5-drops. You know, this is sort of a 3-drop and a 5-drop, and kind of a 6-drop because of disguise. You should definitely be taking Tunnel Tipster before it. I'm not saying otherwise. But I do think it's interesting that it has a win rate this high, especially because I've heard some analysis of the format talking about how the disguised creatures that aren't the gold ones just aren't that good. And, you know, I don't think any of them are insane, but Tunnel Tipster, or rather Vengeful Creeper, is a card I want one of in like all of my green decks, and I think this win rate reflects that. And part of the reason for that is, first of all, you can play it on 3 if you need to. Maybe it'll buff your Tunnel Tipster even. But you can also just play it as a 5-mana 5/5, which is a pretty large creature in this format. And having biggish creatures is kind of nice because there are so many strong tricks in this format, more on that in a moment, that, you know, lots of smaller creatures can even punch through bigger ones. But Vengeful Creeper is big enough that most of those tricks result in that creature dying too, even if, you know, it's enough to kill your Vengeful Creeper, so that matters. And then the fact that you can just snipe a random artifact or enchantment, which there are a significant number of in the format, is nice upside too. I mean, when you do that, when you turn this face up and destroy, like, their Gleaming Gear Drake, like, that is an absolute beating. And, you know, the win rate when you do that, when it actually destroys something by turning face up, is probably really high. You know, that's not what it always does, but it has these useful baselines. It can be a body you add to the board on turn 3 that can trade for something, and it can be a huge body you add to the board on 5, and it can be a body you add on turn 3 and then flip up later as a surprise, you know, to blow something up and maybe run over a creature. So, you know, I think you basically want one Vengeful Creeper in most of your decks. You should be taking it ahead of a 9th pick, I think. Not a lot higher than that, but, you know, I feel pretty good about a 6th or 7th pick Vengeful Creeper most of the time. So the next one I want to look at is being taken even later, but it has the same win rate, again, as Tunnel Tipster, 56.2%, and that is Offender at Large, another disguised creature that I've been reasonably impressed with, and the data seems to back up that it works pretty well. Although, I will say this one, you end up playing face up more often than Vengeful Creeper, probably. But either way, you know, it's taken around a 9th pick, and it has the same win rate. You know, when you however it is you play this, whether you, again, it's nice that you can play it on 3 and trade off for something, and then it's nice you can flip it up later. And the buff effect it gives is can sometimes be really devastating. Like, sometimes your opponent just doesn't expect you to, you're attacking with your disguise creature, which is this, and you're attacking with something else, and they're like, okay, well, their disguise creature isn't the one I want to block because they might be able to turn it face up and run my creature over, so I'm going to block the other one. And sometimes that works out for them, but I've had at least a couple of times where I had a face down offender at large, turned it face up, killed their other creature, and smashed in for 5. And my creature usually dies too, but the fact that I, got rid of their blocker and my other smaller creature while adding this body to the board is good. It is a body that can trade for most things. It doesn't line up against tricks quite as well. 4 toughness is a lot less than 5, in this format. But it is pretty nice, and it is a card, again, where, having one of these in most of my red decks feels pretty good. All right, let's look at another card with a similar, though not identical win rate, and that is Fanatical Strength. Has a win rate of 56.3%, so a little higher than Tunnel Tipster, and it is taken around pick 9.26. This is kind of like Vengeful Creeper. I would still take Tunnel Tipster before I take Fanatical Strength, despite the difference in win rate. The data doesn't just say, hey, this has a higher win rate, let's take it. The fact of the matter is that Tunnel Tipster is, better in more situations, especially on turn 2, when you really want a 2-drop, than Fanatical Strength is. But combat tricks in general in this format are just really good, and I think, this isn't a format I've enjoyed a ton, and I think a big part of that is tons of games end because of combat tricks, and there's lots of board states where you just can't block between your opponent attacking with disguised creatures and the really high quality tricks. And I think this one is sort of the cream of the crop, although maybe the 1 green uncommon one that gives +1/+1 for each creature, that's pretty great too. But Fanatical Strength is just an absolute beating. +3/+3 and trample for 2 is just really, really good. And it is still a trick, so you don't want to take it when you're taking Tunnel Tipster. But when I play a green deck in this format, and I'm running 2 or 3 of these a lot of the time, provided I have a lot of creatures, which is most of the time, because this just wins virtually every combat, and it ends games with regularity. In early game, it helps your smaller creature, punch up and kill a bigger one and maybe trample over for 1 or something like that, right? But then in the late game, when you're attacking with your 5/5 Vengeful Creeper and you use Fanatical Strength, it can just end the game out of nowhere. And, it has these capabilities. It's even good against a bunch of the removal in the format that is damage-based. So, it has a lot of uses for a trick, and I liked it in the set review. A C+, I think, is what I gave this, and that's a high grade for a trick. And I think that grade is about right, but I think people still aren't valuing this trick especially, but tricks in general quite enough, because almost every deck in this format is a creature-heavy deck, and basically every color has good tricks. And for your decks to be successful in this format, you kind of need them. Most of your decks in this format have 2 to 4 tricks in them. And I think they need to be taken a little bit higher than they are. They're all taken pretty late for how high their win rate is. And I think that's more pronounced in this format than it has been in any of them. Like I said, I'm not saying that's a mark of a good format. In fact, I think it's the opposite, because you get punished so hard just for blocking in this format. And you're in so many situations, especially if you're on the draw and your opponent's on the play, where you're like, I kind of need to block here, but they probably have a trick, so I guess I can't, and it just happens. It happens way too much. It decreases the amount of interaction in the format in general. But if you're looking to win, take more of these tricks, run more tricks in your format, take them higher than they're currently being taken, and I think you'll find yourself winning a lot more. All right, let's look now at Enlisted Worm. So this is from the bonus sheet, the list. And this one's interesting to me. I don't know why it's being taken as late as it is. We don't see it a lot. And maybe people are their eyes are glazing over because it's not a card they think about in the format, because it's on the bonus sheet. But it's being taken around a 5th pick, but it has an A-level win rate of 61.6%, right? This card's just great, I really liked it in the set review. 6 mana, 5/5 Cascade just gives you a great 2-for-1 all the time, and in this format with all the creatures in it, you're usually adding something to the board. Feels especially nuts when you hit a 5-drop or something. You don't always, of course, but almost no matter what you hit, combat tricks are a little awkward. That is one thing I did just talk about how good combat triggers are in the format, and Enlisted Worm's awkward with them, but it's still putting up as high of a win rate as it is, even with that problem. Its fail case is basically a 2-for-1, and it adds a big body to the board too. Similarly, there's Maverick Thopterist, which is also being taken around the same time as Tunnel Tipster. This is also from the bonus sheet. It's being taken around pick 4.66, but it's a bomb. I mean, it's a 61.6% win rate, same as Enlisted Worm. Even if you just cast this regularly, you're getting a pretty good deal. But it's really not that hard to make its cost go down by 1 or 2 because you have random clues in play. Especially if you're in blue-red, like, this is really easy to decrease the cost of. Not that hard to play it on, like, turn 3 or 4. It just ends up being a complete beating between the 3 bodies it gives you, 2 of which have evasion. So these are both cards that are, at the same level as the biggest bombs in this format, but they're being taken around the same time as Tunnel Tipster. So those are ones that really need, like, if you see these in your pack 1, pick 1, you should almost always be taking them. There's very rarely going to be a card that's better than either of these. They just win you the game a huge chunk of the time when you cast them. I want to talk about one more rare, and this one's not quite as egregious, but I am surprised at how late it's being taken, and that is Doppelgang, which is being taken around a 3rd pick. That's pretty high, right? But it's got a 62.1% win rate. I think it's like the 5th highest win rate in the format. So, you should be first picking it every time you see it, especially because it's in green. That makes it really easy to splash in this format. Maybe part of the reason this one isn't being taken higher is I underrated it in the set review. I just didn't think the base, I saw how nuts it would be if you could pay, 8 total mana for it, right? That obviously is going to win you the game. But the base level of the card also ends up being good enough that you can do it and get a copy of the best permanent on the battlefield. And that fail case is strong enough, obviously, with this high of a win rate, that it's well worth having in your deck for this like late game, you win the game is basically what it says on it. When you get 2 copies of the 2 best permanents on the battlefield, your opponent just can't win. I mean, they just don't. So it has this like, it's one of these where I wish we had somehow could get even more data. Like when someone pays 8 total for this, I would imagine the win rate is like 85% or something crazy like that. And I would imagine when you have to pay, when you're only making 1 copy of one thing, it's probably like 57% or something like that. But the overall is well, worth having this sort of, fine but not exciting base level, and then this completely insane ceiling. So it should also be, being taken. It should say, the average pick should be like 1.2 or something like that on Doppelgang, not 3.05. Again, it's not quite as bad as the list cards I mentioned, but it's still being taken significantly later than it should be. All right, so let's move now back to talking about commons and uncommons, and let's go with Reasonable Doubt. This has a win rate of 56%, so a little lower than Tunnel Tipster, and it's being taken around a 9th pick. This is kind of like Tricks in that, again, I would take Tunnel Tipster. I mean, obviously the win rate's higher, but I would take a 2-drop with a similar win rate over Reasonable Doubt every time because, it's far more situational. It's not just a 2-mana thing that adds to the board. You have to line it up correctly, but it does end up being a pretty nice counterspell. If you end up in a spot where you don't have that many 2-drops, running Reasonable Doubt in your 2-drop slot isn't terrible because at least it stops your opponent's 2-drops and 3-drops and stuff like that. And the suspect upside matters too. It doesn't always, but it's not unusual to counter your opponent's creature, give your thing suspect, and suddenly it can attack more effectively on your turn. And that's a pretty good tempo swing. This isn't a card you desperately want to take super high, but I think it should be being taken higher than a 9th pick. And, having one of these around in most of your blue decks is fine. And like I said, I've had situations where my draft didn't go super well in terms of making sure you have, 2-drops that do add to the board. Reasonable Doubt's not quite as good as that, but it can kind of fill that slot when you need it to. And then, it's just a reasonable counterspell as well. Next, let's talk about Person of Interest. This one surprises me. I didn't expect this one to be getting taken as late as it is. Its average pick is 6.12 and has a win rate of 58.5%. I think it's the 4th highest win rate for a common in the set, and yet cards like Tunnel Tipster are being taken, significantly ahead of it, as are, lots of other commons that just aren't as good. I mean, adding these 2 bodies to the board is great. One of them has Menace. Going wide in this format, especially in red-white, is really strong. You've also got a Detective, which matters. So you've got a Suspect, which matters for some decks. Like, this just checks a bunch of synergy boxes for, 3 different archetypes in the format. And, going wide and buffing your whole board is, a very real win condition in the format. And Person of Interest gives you these 2 bodies, and your opponent has to have 3 bodies to account for those. And so this is another situation like tricks are nuts because, you can just attack with both into a board where your opponent just has 2 2s or whatever. And, what are they supposed to do? Because they can't really block a lot of the time. And so, it's not a 2-drop, and I think maybe that's what has caused it to slip a little bit. Like the other cards that are ahead of it there are cards ahead of it in win rate and in terms of average pick that should be like Inside Source and stuff like that, which is kind of just a better version of this card, but they are comparable. And this does cost 1 more, and maybe that's why it's being taken a little later, but I first pick Person of Interest in this format sometimes, and I don't think that's a bad idea. It's just a really, really strong card in a format where you get a lot of value out of going wide. Let's look now at Unauthorized Exit, which has a win rate of 55.8%, so only a little better than average, but it's being taken between a 9th and a 10th pick. And I think it should be getting taken a full pick before that. So why is this good? Well, a big part of it is stuff I've already mentioned in this video. One of the reasons it's better than it usually is because everyone's playing a ton of combat tricks. So one of the problems with Unauthorized Exit-like cards, and usually they're when all the card does is bounce a non-land permanent or a creature or whatever for 2 mana, it's usually a C- level card, and that's because while it can give you some tempo, you actually go down a card when you use them. Well, in a format where everyone is just slinging tricks on their creatures and you can just leave 2 mana up and bounce the creature they're targeting, you get a card of value and you get tempo. So that's what results in this being better than normal in this format. Any cheap removal is, but the nice thing about Unauthorized Exit is most of the removal that is 2 or 1 mana in this format, sure, in the right when a trick is used on the right creature, it can blow the people out, if you shock it or galvanize it or whatever. But you can't do that with the big old creatures. You can with Unauthorized Exit. You can set up a block and make your opponent's mouth water, and then they just try to play Fanatical Strength on their Vengeful Creeper or whatever, and you're just well, I bounce it. And that's just a big play. And so that's what's resulted in this being more of a card you kind of want one of in most of your blue decks. Surveil doesn't hurt either, of course, but the fact that every deck in this format has 2 to 4 tricks in it makes Unauthorized Exit a lot better than it normally would be. And the last card I want to look at is Evidence Examiner. So, this format has some problems, but one of them is not that blue-green isn't good, for once. Blue-green is actually a pretty good color pair in this format. And Evidence Examiner is, of course, the Signpost Uncommon. I wasn't thrilled about it in the set review, and I don't think it's an insane Signpost Uncommon, but it's being taken around a 7th pick, and it has a win rate of 57.6%. It is gold, so again, I would take Tunnel Tipster over it. This doesn't mean, hey, always take me over Tunnel Tipster, and that's because the percentage chance of you being able to play this in your deck off of an early pick is lower because it's a gold card. But it is a pretty good Signpost Uncommon, and there are a few reasons for that. First, you need to have 2-drops in this format, and if you just have to play this thing on turn 2 and trade it off for a disguise creature or whatever, or for a removal spell, that's fine. It's not good, and the fact that it's blue-green, sometimes it's hard to cast on turn 2, and that's a hurdle, but it has this big late-game upside. I mean, collecting evidence, the format has its problems, but a few of the collect evidence build-arounds have really panned out, and that's one of my favorite things in the format. So Evidence Examiner and the 4-mana 3/3 that makes a Thopter when you collect evidence. If you ever get both of those in play, it is a complete beating. It's an insane engine, one that adds real stuff to the board. You get a clue and you get a 1/1 Thopter, and you're not paying any mana to make it happen. It's very easy to do, and Evidence Examiner is a great enabler for collect evidence payoffs, like the Thopter generating thing, and it's also on its own, just you can play it in the late game and it just starts cranking clues out, and that's going to win you the game. So it has this mode that you kind of need your cards to have in this format, or you might get run over, which is hey, look, I played a 2/2. I'm going to make this trade for one of your cards, even if it's a trick. I'm going to make you use up resources to get through my 2/2. And then it has crazy late game upside where it turns into a very real engine, especially if you can combine it with some other collect evidence upside. So Evidence Examiner has been quite good and is a better signpost uncommon than I really gave it credit for in the set review. All right, so those are 10 cards that are better than you think they are, based on when people seem to be taking them and what their win rate is. Hope you found the video useful. Next week, we, as usual, at this stage in the format, will be doing the opposite. We'll look at cards that are worse than you think they are, cards that are being taken too highly given what their win rate is. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to watch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on past videos, including a bunch more videos about this format and videos of me playing the format, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.